Hey everyone, I know what you're probably already thinking. Another neon text tutorial? I've seen dozens of them around the web. And you're right, there are plenty of them. But I've received enough requests that I set out to create a very simple method to creating neon text with just layer styles. Now before I begin, I have to remind you, the layer styles that I'm about to use work well for the font and size that I chose to use. If you use a different font, you'll definitely need to tweak the layer styles to get the result that you're looking for. Let's begin. Starting off with my font, I downloaded the Neon 80s font from dafont.com. It's usually the site I go to when I'm looking for new fonts. In terms of size, I'm going to be going big, 250 points. Now I can type out my word of choice. Once your text is typed out, let's dive into the layer styles, starting with a gradient overlay. Before editing the actual colors of the gradient, change the style to reflected and the scale to 50%. Now we can edit the colors. The far left color will be a nice light blue. I'm going to use EA F7 FF for the value. And then on the right side, it's going to be a slightly darker blue. A1 CA F8. Good, and that's all for the gradient. Of course, if you want a different colored neon text, you can change the colors accordingly. Now to give our text some depth, let's add a bevel and emboss. Starting at the top, turn the depth to 150% and the size to 10 pixels. Moving down to shading, we have a lot of changes. Start by turning off global light and set both the angle and the altitude at 90 degrees. For the gloss contour, I found that the ring contour gave me a really neat result. You also want to make sure to turn on anti-aliased whenever that option is available to make sure the edges of your text are nice and smooth. Now as for the highlight mode, you really don't have to worry about any of these options. Because our altitude was set to 90 degrees, these options really won't affect us. The shadow, on the other hand, is a very different story. Change the blend mode to color burn and the opacity to 100%. Now we're going to use a nice dark blue for the color. I'm going to use 002B57. Good. At this point, things are still looking pretty flat. Go ahead and activate the contour option on the left. There are a few contours that will add some additional depth to our text, but I found that the rounded steps contour worked quite well, with a range of 100%. And finally, I want to add a texture to our bevel. This will give our text a slightly glass feel to it. For the pattern, I'm going to be using the herringbone pattern. If you don't see this pattern, click on the arrow at the top right-hand corner of the pattern picker, choose Patterns, and then choose Append. As for the other options, I set my scale at 50% and my depth at 5%. We only want a very subtle texture. Next, to lighten up the edges a little bit, let's add an inner shadow, which is actually going to be an inner highlight. Set your blend mode to overlay with the opacity at 100%, and then change your color to a pure white. Now down below, decrease your distance to 0, increase the choke to 10, and the size to 20. 2 more to go, we're almost finished. To pull the text slightly away from our background, let's add a drop shadow. Start by setting the opacity at 15%. When that's done, turn off global light and set the angle at 90 degrees. Now set your distance at 6 and your size at 4. Good. And finally, we need to make glow. Let's add an outer glow. Starting with the blend mode, depending on the background that you use, you may need to try out a few different options, but for most backgrounds, linear dodge should work quite well. As for the color, I'm going to use a baby blue, 6F B9 FE, with an opacity of 100%. Under Elements, to create a soft glow, crank up the size to 170 pixels. Now down under Quality, I'm going to use the Gaussian contour with a range of 60%. And that should do it. Neon text created only with layer styles. Of course, if you want a different color neon text, just go back and change the blues to a green or a purple or a yellow. It's up to you. And if you want to read this tutorial and view the layer styles, I've posted them on iceflowstudios.com right now. And as always, if you enjoyed this tutorial, make sure to like it, favorite it, comment, and subscribe. Take care.